Your ancestors weren't busy, not the way you are. They didn't have meetings, deadlines, or 100 unread messages pulling at their attention. And yet, somehow, they built everything that eventually became you. Most people picture ancient humans as desperate survivors, always hunting, always running, always one bad day away from becoming something else's dinner. But that picture is almost entirely wrong, and the evidence has been sitting in the archaeological record for decades, quietly waiting for someone to pay attention. Here's what actually happened. The average hunter-gatherer in the Paleolithic era worked somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day to meet all of their survival needs. That's it. Food, shelter, water, done. The anthropologist Marshall Solins called this the original affluent society, meaning that the first humans weren't poor people struggling to survive. They were people with enormous amounts of free time who simply didn't need very much. Read that again because it flips everything you were taught about human progress. So what did they do with the rest of those hours? They talked. Mostly they talked. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups like Robin Dunbar at Oxford have found that the majority of social time is spent in conversation, not planning hunts, not debating strategy, but gossiping, storytelling, teasing, and laughing. Dunbar's research into what he calls social grooming suggests that language itself evolved not as a tool for coordination, but as a replacement for the physical grooming that primates used to bond. Your brain didn't develop complex speech so you could write emails. It developed so you could tell someone else in your group that the elder over by the fire had been acting strange lately. Think about what that means for a second. Your ancestors were, by biological design, built to spend hours in idle, wandering, face-to-face conversation. Not productive conversation. Not goal-oriented conversation. Just the warm, directionless exchange of being alive near other people who knew your name. That is the original human activity. Everything else came second. But talking wasn't all. There was also a tremendous amount of sitting. Archaeologist and physical anthropologist Timothy Taylor at the University of Bradford has spent years examining what ancient skeletal remains tell us about posture and daily movement. What the bones suggest is a rhythm of intense, short bursts of activity followed by long, restful social periods, not the constant, moderate movement that modern fitness culture romanticizes. Ancient humans were explosive when they needed to be, and genuinely still when they didn't. Your body still carries that expectation. It's one reason that sitting itself doesn't harm you, but purposeless, isolated screen-facing sitting sends signals your nervous system doesn't know how to process. What else filled the hours? Making things, slowly, with enormous patience and focus. The oldest known art objects, ochre engravings found in Blombos Cave in South Africa dating back roughly 75,000 years, weren't functional. They served no survival purpose. Someone sat down, picked up a piece of pigment, and made marks that meant something. Researcher Francesco Derrico, who has studied these engravings extensively, argues that this kind of symbolic behavior represents a mind that had already fully crossed the threshold into abstract thought, a mind that needed to externalize what it was experiencing on the inside. Your ancestors made art not because they had time left over after surviving. They made art because making things is what the human mind does when it's working properly. Does that sound familiar? Think about the last time you were truly relaxed. What did your hands want to do? Doodle, build, arrange, create something small and slightly pointless. That's not procrastination. That's an ancient cognitive function expressing itself through whatever materials happen to be nearby. Now here's the counterintuitive part. Play was serious, not metaphorically serious. Functionally, neurologically, structurally serious. Children in hunter-gatherer societies played for enormous stretches of time, and that play was rarely supervised in the way modern parents understand the word. Developmental psychologist Peter Gray, who has studied the psychology of free play extensively, found that hunter-gatherer children essentially ran their own education through self-directed play across mixed age groups. Older children taught younger ones not because adults assigned that role, but because teaching, it turns out, is satisfying. Your brain gets a small reward signal for successfully transferring knowledge to another person. It's why explaining something you know well to someone who doesn't makes you feel good. That feeling is ancient. And play wasn't just for children. Adults played too. Competitive games, music, dance, elaborate ritual. These weren't breaks from life. They were central activities that served real social and psychological functions. Dance, in particular, appears across every known human culture without exception, and anthropologists believe it likely predates language as a bonding tool. When your body moves in rhythm with another body, something happens neurologically that words can't fully replicate. It's one of the fastest known ways to generate a sense of trust and shared identity between strangers. Ancient humans knew this without knowing they knew it. So the picture is starting to shift, isn't it? Instead of desperate survival, try to imagine this. A morning spent gathering food in a few hours, moving through landscape you know intimately, following paths your grandparents walked. An afternoon sitting in the shade, talking about everything and nothing, your hands busy with something small. Children running and shouting nearby, occasionally pulling adults into games that adults pretend to resist but secretly enjoy. A fire in the evening. Stories. Not lessons wrapped in stories, but the raw, uncut human hunger for narrative. For someone to say, here is what happened, here is what it meant, here is what to feel about it. Your ancestors weren't bored by this life. They were designed for it. And here's where the modern mirror appears, and it isn't comfortable. The last 200 years of industrialization have compressed and restructured human time in ways that have no precedent anywhere in evolutionary history. You are the first kind of human who regularly spends 8 or 10 hours a day performing a single specialized cognitive task for money in a room full of people you didn't choose, regulated by a clock that has nothing to do with your body's actual rhythms. The agricultural revolution started the compression about 10,000 years ago, but the industrial revolution made it extreme, and the digital revolution has now made it nearly total. There is very little room in a modern schedule for the activities that ancient human brains were calibrated to expect. Does your brain notice? It does. Anxiety rates, loneliness metrics, attention fragmentation, the rising sense that something fundamental is missing despite material comfort. These aren't character flaws and they aren't mysteries. They are the predictable outputs of a cognitive system that evolved for one kind of life and is being run continuously in a completely different one. Your brain spent 300,000 years expecting conversation, creative work, rest, movement, narrative, and community. It did not expect a calendar blocked into half-hour increments with a notification arriving every 4 minutes. None of this means the modern world is wrong or that you should abandon it. That's not the point. The point is understanding. When you know what your brain was originally shaped to do with a day, you start seeing your struggles not as personal failures, but as reasonable responses to unreasonable conditions. You weren't built to be productive for 9 hours straight. Your attention isn't broken. Your need for rest isn't laziness. Your craving for conversation that goes nowhere useful isn't a waste of time. These are all deeply biological, evolutionarily ancient needs expressing themselves in a world that has largely stopped making room for them. Marshall Solins argued that it wasn't farming or industry or technology that created leisure. Leisure came first. Leisure was the original human condition, and everything built since then has been, in one sense, an elaborate negotiation with the possibility of returning to it. Every vacation, every weekend, every moment when you put the phone down and just sit outside without an agenda, you are briefly, imperfectly, reaching back towards something your ancestors had as a default. What would change if you treated rest as a biological requirement rather than a reward? What would shift if you understood that making things with your hands, telling stories, talking without purpose, and playing games with people you love weren't indulgences but necessities, not nice-to-haves, but the original operating conditions of the human nervous system? The archaeological record doesn't lie. The skeletal remains don't lie. The cave paintings don't lie. The genetic legacy embedded in the very architecture of your brain doesn't lie. Ancient humans got up in the morning without an alarm, moved when their bodies said to move, rested when the sun was high, made things for the pleasure of making them, talked more than they did almost anything else, and generally spent their days doing what felt, in some deep, wordless sense, like enough. You live in a world they couldn't have imagined. You have access to things they could never have dreamed of. And somewhere underneath all of it, operating on the same ancient hardware they ran, your brain is still quietly searching for the conditions it was built for. Your ancestors weren't busy. And maybe, just maybe, That's the most radical, counterintuitive, quietly revolutionary thing you'll learn today.